Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm delighted that our next speaker will be focusing on culture, wellbeing and mobilising a workforce during these uncertain times. Shirley Rogers was appointed to the Scottish Government in 2012. Until April 2020, she was NHS Scotland's Chief People Officer and the Director with responsibility for health workforce, leadership and EU exit. In April, she became the Director for Organisational Readiness, leading the work on preparation for withdrawal from the EU and a coordinated response to COVID-19. Shirley, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed to HPMA for inviting me to share some thoughts this morning. I'm really looking forward to, I hope, having a conversation, albeit through an unusual medium. So just to get a little bit of background to unpack the introduction from Julia, I formed the Organisational Readiness Directorate on March. That date is memorable for three reasons. One, it was the World Health Organization declared what was going to become a global pandemic. Two, it was my wedding anniversary and there wasn't much champagne to be popped on that day. And three, we formed a directorate and from the Scottish Government perspective started to ask people to work from home. So what I was going to do over the next 20 minutes or so to give us some time for some conversation is to talk a little bit about how we formed a team in those unusual circumstances and how we supported each other to deal with a huge amount of uncertainty. And that really has been the hallmark of 2020 to a much greater extent than we ever expected. You know, this time last year, when I was leading the work around EU exit preparations, we thought that that was the biggest challenge that we were going to face as a society. And it's still an enormous challenge. But in comparison to COVID and the impact that that has had on people's lives, it's still very significant, but it's been put into perspective by a global pandemic. So we took the decision that we wanted to look at organisational readiness as an organisation because we were really interested in managing concurrent risk, and that's what I do. My team and I manage the concurrencies of COVID preparation, EU exit preparation, and just right now, winter. And I'm speaking to you from Peebles today, which is in the Scottish borders. We've got our first weather warnings for snow, and it's the 2nd of December and it's a bit chilly. So bringing together all of those risks and also managing the implications of one to another has been really important for us. So if I take an example of business preparation, for example, in EU readiness terms, that's one dimension. If we were looking at how ready we were this time last year for the potential to leave in October, all of the assumptions that we made there have had to be reconsidered in the light of business preparedness through the lens of COVID. An awful lot of organisations dealing with an awful lot of stuff. But turning to the team, one of the things that has been really apparent is that we have been required to expect the unexpected over the last 6-9 months, dealing with issues as they arise. And most of those issues have had significant consequences for the population. So we've been talking about the sort of levels that parts of our country go into and various other aspects of that work. But they've also, and the area I particularly wanted to concentrate on this morning, has been the individual implications of some of that stuff and how we've built a team around that and how we've considered whether or not the culture of our team was something that we could create as supportively as possible. So the world looks different. The world looks different now. If I had said to the people on the call that in order to go into a shop you had to wear a face mask, I think people would not have believed us. I think if we talked about the fact that we were going to have, for a fairly substantial chunk of the year, our schools closed, people being shielded and so on, I think people would have struggled to believe that was how we were going to spend the year. And those things emerged really quickly. So one of the things that's been important for me as a leader within my team has been working with that team to establish how comfortable they are with uncertainty. The world doesn't look the same, and individual responses to change have been really, really important for me as a leader to understand, and for us to build a team that recognizes that people are in various places on that spectrum. Some people enjoy working from home. For other people, it's really, really hard miles. Some people thrive in uncertainty and are comfortable with being creative in that space. Other people much less so. And as a team, we recruited a team digitally. Most of the people who work as part of my directorate, I've never actually physically met. So we had to do an awful lot to try and make sure that people were going to be comfortable with the environment that they were going to be coming to work in, and also that we could spend a lot of time developing that team and doing things that I'll come on to talk about in a tick, to try and create that team that is supportive of people who have got their own individual struggles. Some people are looking forward with possibilities. Some people looking forward with a great deal of anxiety. Some people looking back and yearning for normality and waiting for that normality to return. And like every team, we've got at least one of everything. And understanding that has been really important. And that's a reflection of society. For some people, the constraints that COVID has placed us under have been incredibly restrictive. For other people, they've actually found their place back in their local environment or in their nature or in whatever it is, that they found quite liberating. As I said earlier on, I live in the Scottish borders. It's quite liberating to not have to drive into Edinburgh every day. By the same token, I've really struggled in missing the normal human interactions that you get in the workplace. And everybody has been somewhere along that spectrum. We created that directorate, and I think we had at the start a team of about 10 or 12 people. That grew rapidly into a much bigger team, most of whom we'd never met. And engagement and being purposeful about that engagement and saying right from the outset that we will tackle these enormous issues, COVID planning, EU exit planning, two of the biggest things that are ever likely to hit us in the same year. Doing that as a team was so important. So setting out that approach that we were always going to do it as a team and being deliberate about that was really, really important. I'll touch a bit more on that as we go. But understanding that for some people, this was a really, really big deal. Some of you might have heard the quote before that says, as a nation, we march on our stomachs. And what that always means for me is that making sure that we get the basics right has been really, really important. So things like understanding the pressures that families are under when they're homeschooling, and they're trying to do that whilst at the same time trying to do a job where it wasn't possible for us to let up. And trying to be aware of that, support people with their technology needs and all the rest of it. But also just recognizing that the shape of the working day might be a bit different because people have got other things to juggle, whether that's homeschooling or whether it's caring for people who are poorly or whatever. The poorly issue was really quite significant, partly because obviously some people were unfortunate enough to suffer with COVID and needed support in that space. But also that sense of anxiety and stress about what that might mean for families and the people that we care about and how that impacted on us as individuals has been really important to acknowledge and make sure that we had appropriate mechanisms where people could seek advice, where people could seek some support, and sometimes just that really escalated levels of pastoral care so that people would know that they weren't on their own. I've found as a leader that in order to encourage that, I've probably given more of myself this year than I ever have before, in terms of sharing my own anxieties about my, I haven't seen my mother for a year. She lives in the south of England. It's not been possible for me to do that over the course of most of this year. Those kinds of sharings have been really, really important to give people permission to share their own anxieties. We've dealt with a whole range of things around things like sleeplessness. People who have just really struggled with working from home, not having the sort of society that they might have around them, and a sense of isolation and loneliness from people. And from a cultural perspective, it's been really important that we have not been pounding the sort of heroic leadership approach. It has been about supporting each other to know that some days it's just going to be a tricky day. And some days the water feels like it's at your nostrils. And that's okay. And we'll help each other, as long as it's not all days that feel like that. But we've also spent an awful lot of time talking about kindness. And we've also spent an awful lot of time talking about the structures within which we work. So we very quickly went onto a shift and on-call basis. That was unusual for people who had not experienced that in their working lives. I've worked in a number of different sectors and experienced a number of different working pattern arrangements. Most of my career been spent in the NHS, which is a 24/7 operation. For many of the people coming into my team, that was new. And it was really important to remind them that the real prize about working in those deliberate patterns of work is not actually knowing when you're at work. It's knowing when you're not. And being sacrosanct about not contacting people when they were resting, which I think has been really, really important. Looking at all of the analysis of how working from home has impacted on people, one of the big things that people say is that it's really difficult now to distinguish their homework from their work. So I used to drive into work. That was the boundary of my day. And I would come home and often work in the evenings, but I knew I was working in the evenings. Now I walk across the landing from my bedroom to my study. And it's really important that we create boundaries that let people know that when they're at home, they are allowed to be at home, and that home space is a home space, not just an extension of an office space. And for us, the fairly rigorous pursuit of a good rota of staff to let people know when they were on, but more importantly, to let people know when they were off. Underpinning that has been a real determination around communications. Communications so that people not just knew what was going on, but didn't have to then constantly contact their colleagues out of hours to find out what was happening if they were responding. So we have every day since the beginning of April done a daily bird table call, which I chair with my team. Anybody can join it. Everybody does, which is interesting. So here we are from the 1st of April into the beginning of December. Every day, if people are at work, they dial into the bird table. It's not had anybody drop off for lack of interest or information. And it's a really good one-stop shop once a day to let everybody know what's going on, share ideas, think about things that they're worried about, alert people to any kind of issues that are going on. It's been much more dynamic than sending a memo. We very quickly learned that email was something that unless you'd got a really big shovel, you weren't going to get your way through in the day. So rather than sending people emails after emails and wading through inboxes with 500, 600, 700, sometimes a couple of thousand emails in them, using that discipline of a half-hour meeting at the beginning of every day has been really, really important. And it's stripped away some of the layers of bureaucracy and hierarchy that may not have helped us to be able to respond as quickly as we could. We believe in evidence-based policymaking. That's something that has been a strapline for, I suspect, every government, but certainly the Scottish Government for a very long time. There's a slight wrinkle in that when you're in the COVID space, which is there isn't always the evidence to draw on. So the reminder of, first of all, the benefit of research, seeking wide advice, involving communities of scientists and local government and a whole range of other people in that decision making. It's not always perfect because sometimes things have to be done at pace, but having that broad church that can come together to provide advice. And over the weeks, obviously, we've had more by way of information and so on. But it caused us to question things like the levels of bureaucracy about speed of decision making. What it also reminded us of, though, is that the skills that we have are still relevant. So program management skills are really, really important. In trying to manage concurrent risk, being able to see what the impact of a decision taken over here is to a decision taken over there. Things like there's no point in doing something about encouraging people to stay at home if there isn't a support network to allow them to stay at home. Things like there's no point in having regulations about destinations if you don't also have regulations around transport. And when you try and release those, being aware of the consequences of them. And that's led me into some interesting places, I have to say. Some areas where we've had to very quickly acquire knowledge on subjects that were, a long way away from some of the things that we had routinely done. If I share with you for a giggle that I've spent quite a lot of the last week trying to provide advice around Santa's grottos. So anything from, PPE and the ultimate requirements that were needed there to what are the restrictions for Christmas and how do we manage through those and various other things. But what was really important was that reminder that even in times of uncertainty, those core skills of communication, being a deliberate leader, and thinking about consequences and risk management have been really, really important for us. And then finally, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the sort of mobilisation and leadership aspects of this stuff. Mobilisation in the COVID space was relatively easy. There was a common cause and everybody knew that that had to be the focus because of the sheer size of the pandemic. But mobilising to achieve something has been really, really important. And I think one of the things that I'm quite proud of is that we have always set out what we needed to achieve, whether that was for shielded patients or whether that was for community support or whatever it was. But from a leadership perspective, we have had to be really clear about, I suppose, the objectives that we had about protecting the population, about doing as little damage to the economy as we can, proceeding along the 4 harms line. So those 4 harms being the harms of COVID, the other health-related harms that are potentially there as a result of COVID. So because hospitals and services are focused on COVID, what else is happening? The economic harms and the social harms, things like the additional commitments around mental health, because we recognise what a tough year this has been for people and the impacts of mental health. A whole aspect of resilience and being thoughtful about how resilient our team can be, how and what we need to do to try and improve that resilience as best we can. How we learn at pace and share that information in an appropriate kind of way so that people aren't overwhelmed by all of this information that is coming at them, but they can use their learning skills to extract from there the things that are going to be really critical. And I say it, also remembering the joy of working as a team. And for all the fact that it has been extremely demanding, there have also been moments where we've injected joy into that team, because that's what we would have done in the office. So I did indeed dress up as a giant pumpkin for our pumpkin competition. We are currently working through how we can do things for Christmas around a show and tell of decorated gingerbread people and that kind of stuff. Because actually what keeps the team going is the relationships, and those relationships have to have times of high activity, but also times when people can just get to know each other a bit and to understand a little bit of motivation. Noticing people, noticing their good days, their bad days, giving yourself the time to be pastoral, to be in that pastoral space, crafting the stuff that you can do out of the normal run of the day so that you can do that and spend the time with your people, actually with your people. I think perversely, though I haven't actually seen them in person, my levels of visibility as a leader this year have been higher than they've ever been. It's been really important for people to know you, see you working alongside of them, see you supporting them and helping them through some of the really difficult issues. And I guess that's my final point really, is that in terms of our culture, I'd like to think that we've been in some of that space for a long time. But actually that importance of the team, that importance of kindness in the team, that importance of support, and actually thinking about people rather more than process, where there is a choice, trying to make sure that we make the organisation as person-centred as we can, has actually given us significantly better performance as well. And people feel better about joining it. Still tough. We are preparing to leave the European Union. We still don't know the detail of whether or not that will be with a deal or not a deal, or the kind that it will be. 31st of December, we will be working hard, and we'll be working hard for all the time to it and all of the time post it, to try and make sure that people are as protected as we can for anything that might go wrong, and that businesses and so on are able to work as effectively as they can in a world post-EU membership. So times are not getting easier for us particularly, but by the same token, the energy that people are able to bring, because some of the deliberate recasting of our environment has been really, really important. I'll leave it there because I am keen to have more of a conversation than just talking to a screen where the only thing I can see is my own face. But I am absolutely delighted to have had the opportunity to speak to you, and I really hope you got something from the things that I had to say. Thank you.
Shirley, thank you so much. And a few words, if you could just mute for a second, because we've had a bit of feedback in the rehearsal. Thank you. So thank you for that fascinating talk, Shirley. What a wedding anniversary on the 13th of March. Gosh. It's not every day or every year that you have a wedding anniversary announced, that there's a global pandemic. So there we go. Some really interesting points that you've made there. I think the importance of creating boundaries, working at home is really important. We've got a few questions coming up, and I'll just finish on my reflections and then we'll go to the questions. So yeah, working at home and creating those boundaries, not everyone can do that. I have a lot of coaching clients that live in, 1-bed, 2-bed flats, don't have any outdoor space. And when it was, the ultimate sort of lockdown, they were really struggling with that. But it's important also, I think, to have some, when you can, is to have some fun. So I've zoned my house in, so I don't work in certain rooms, and the kitchen has become a bar, a nightclub, a karaoke bar. And our front room has been a living room, a gym, a nightclub and a theatre. And I don't live in that big a house. So I think, it's really important to design how you work at home in a very different way for what looks like a much longer period of time. I've got a couple of questions myself, but what I'm going to do now is turn to the chat because we've got some questions that are coming through now. Jennifer thanks you, and interested to hear your daily bird table is still going. How do you maintain the momentum with these, and is this limited to business matters or also checking in with the team?
Very much both. It's very much checking in with the team and the opportunity. what tends to happen on a typical bird table is that we will have a check-in, we will have some news to share, and maintaining momentum hasn't been really difficult for us because there's always news every day. There's either something happening on COVID, or there's something happening on levels, or there's something happening on EU exit. So maintaining the momentum hasn't been particularly difficult. But what typically happens is that we'll have the bird table chat, and then I always try and keep the next half hour if I can, because people ring me. So individuals will say, I wanted to just tell you I'm feeling this, or I wanted to just know that, or when you said X, I'm a bit interested in that. We've had to work hard, and I've been very deliberate about not making that my bird table. So clearly, because I am involved in a lot of the senior conversations, I've always got quite a lot to chip into it, but it's not mine. I always rotate the chair, I rotate who speaks first and all that kind of stuff. So it's something, some days very strategic. If it's just following cabinet, it will be that kind of lowdown from me on that. But on other days it can be, you know, this is really problematic. So bird tables just before we go into the summer holidays or the school holidays or half term are always very different, because people want to talk about their personal circumstances, how they're going to manage that, how they're going to through that. So it's always a mixture. Momentum hasn't been a problem. We inject a bit of fun as well. So we use the chat bar on Skype, and people will, you know, talk about stuff. So just as an example, one of my team is an ex-naval officer, and was up in his loft last week and discovered that he had a supply of vintage rum. And before we knew it, we were all planning on how we were going to do a socially distanced raid on his house to make sure that we'd got the rum for Christmas and stuff. I'm a baker, so every weekend I try and share photographs of things that I've baked. So we've got people who are desperately trying to need to deliver something to me so they can get a bit of cake. So it's a bit of fun, but the primary reason I think why people come to it and continue to come to it is because they get information, but they also get the sense of a team.
Thank you, Shirley. And as you've been saying that, and I'm really glad that you use the word fun, whether it's serious fun or fun. That's what's really been important, which is why I shared my story about the karaoke kitchen, which some people have mentioned. Who I know well, and I have certainly shared cocktails and drinks with her, said, I started as a comment in July and haven't met the rest of the team in person. We have a chill meeting on a Thursday where we have a chat, make cocktails, run pub quizzes, etc. And Sarah says she's slightly jealous of the karaoke kitchen. We can all make our kitchens karaoke clubs. And Nikki, I know you want to join Sarah in the drinks, and so do I, please. And I think you'll have lots of people, Sarah, want to come with you. However, there is a question linked with this, which is, Claire says, absolutely identify with the experience Shirley has shared. The importance of connection, kindness, support for people, not process, and a focus on outcomes to successfully navigate through the pandemic. I'm interested to hear more from Shirley on what she sees as the impact on individuals who have joined the team but only made virtual connection to the rest of the team. Any thoughts on that, Shirley?
Yeah, so I think I would probably acknowledge that different strokes for different folks. I think some people have taken to that very readily. I think others, we've had to work a bit harder. We have used a lot of fun. We've used a lot of events. We've used things like pumpkin carving competitions and a whole range of other things. We have a virtual quiz on a Thursday night that anybody can go to. Not everybody does. Some people do. they have their cup of coffee or they have their glass of wine next to them or whatever it is. You know, they have teams that compete with each other and have a bit of a giggle. I think some people have found that much harder. You know, I mentioned earlier on about the broad church, and I mentioned it in the context of advice, but it's also important to remember that in the context of the team. Some people find this medium fine and dandy. Some people find it much harder. Some people are more naturally at the extrovert end of the spectrum. Some people like to take their time a bit more. And, you know, I've been very conscious. Every new person that joins the team has an individual conversation with me, and then I leave them with my secretary for 20 minutes who tells them how it really is. And she does all of the, yes, she really did dress up as a pumpkin for the, all that kind of stuff, so that they can see the authenticity of it and find their place in it. And it's for them to find their place to some extent, because it wouldn't do if we were all sitting there. I have Friday night as disco night in our house. In fact, just as a little story, we live in a house in the middle of nowhere, but we have big French doors in the back of the kitchen. And I had not realised that some of our neighbours who actually live across the fields had come to watch my husband and I having disco night on Friday night. And, you know, we're good, but we ain't on Strictly, let's put it that way. So we'd got people, we actually got to know quite a few people just by the fact that they would go for a walk in the fields behind the house and spot us doing disco night and chap on the door and say, can we come in and join? But it wouldn't do if we were all doing that. So for some people, you know, they share things like, there's quite a crafting community, so they share things that they've made. There's quite a book community. So the thread is a work thread, but the conversations are so much broader than that. You know, we've got an awful lot of people with young kids. At this time of the year, particularly for my team, they know that they're going to be working over Christmas and Hogmanay. That's a big deal. So lots of conversations about that and the family and how we can make sure that everybody gets a goodly chunk of time. But yeah, it would, the momentum's not a problem, and the blurring of lines. You know, I said this at a conference a few months ago, and it got quite heavily retweeted, so I don't know whether that was a good thing or not, but I believe it, so there you are. If we ever forget that the H in HR stands for human, we're screwed. You know, we are a people business, and we deliver whatever we deliver through people, and all of those people are different. And it would be entirely wrong and disastrous. I've been an HR professional for, I don't know, 35 years now. It would be disastrous if I presumed that everybody was like me. And thank the Lord they ain't.
Thank you, Shirley. I mean, that really resonated. And I've just got this image now of you dancing through your open front door, your open French doors, and you can imagine me in my kitchen nightclub. My husband plays Go. I couldn't even, you know, sit down, and I'm too much of a dancer and a singer, as people know on this conference. I won't want to sit there playing chess or Go or whatever, but that's what he wants to do. He hates Zoom. He hates Teams, but he has to work on it all the time because he's a coup in the NHS. So, you know, different people, different things, and we just need to be mindful of that. we've got about 5 minutes to go, so I'm happy to take any more questions if you want to put them in the chat. I've got a slightly different question, if I may ask you this. So I'm speaking on a panel tomorrow for Exeter University, and I've been asking senior female leaders this question. It is about women in leadership, so it's a different topic. One of the topics that they've asked me to think about is COVID-19 and women in leadership, a curse or a blessing. Now, I couldn't go past today with your role and not ask you for just your brief reflections on that question, if I may be so bold, Shirley.
So I would argue that having diversity in leadership is always a blessing for anything, whether it's COVID or anything else. I'm a great fan of compassionate leadership, but I don't believe that compassionate leadership is defined by any particular gender. What I will say is being able to anticipate the challenges that our society will face in the face of COVID requires compassion, but I don't believe that that is owned by men or by women. I've been a female leader all my life, obviously, and I've done that in a variety of organisations. I had my first senior post in the police service and then in the health service at a time when that was not as common as it is now, I'm glad to say. But actually, I think the world that I want to try and contribute to reflects the skills that people bring, not their gender, their race, their colour, or their religion, or where they sit in any of their beliefs or whatever. Broadness is really so. You've got me on a subject now, so you know I can imagine that I shall get some Twitter feedback on this, but broadness is so important. There's a lot of reading at the moment. In fact, I was reading a book last night around polarization, and it feels like we're getting into the world of, you know, Twitter and all the rest of it. That's everybody's a yes or everybody's a no. There's an anti-vaxxer, there's a vaxxer, there's a Brexiteer, there's a Remainer, there's a, you know, that we've got this bifurcation. And that just isn't my experience of the world. I think people are quite complex, and sometimes they think this and sometimes they think that. And what's really important for us as leaders, I think, is to never lose sight of that breadth. And that breadth is best achieved by having people in the team who reflect as much as we can of the society that we live in. So there's a bit of me that's in the Bader Ginsburg camp that says, you know, I want to be in every room where every decision is made. But that's not to exclude anybody else. That's not to say that we're better than others, or, you know, that it's not that kind of thing. I genuinely believe that, particularly in uncertainty, particularly at times when we don't actually know all of the right answers, that there is a real benefit in having a broad church who can think about a whole range of things. What I will say is that, and I don't think this is a gender point, I'm certainly not intending it as a gender point, I think that a culture that allows itself the freedom to acknowledge that it won't get everything right is more likely to get things right, perversely. Because, and you'll have seen some of the great political leaders, you know, the Jacinta Ardens of this world, who have been really, really strong in acknowledging that they're doing their very best, but they're not going to get everything right. But that's a genuine response to being a female leader through, you know, I've had the fortune, or in some cases great misfortune, to be doing this kind of job in the face of some enormous tragedies. And what I've seen is leaders who rise to the top being able to couple decision making with compassion. Doing the right thing is really, really hard sometimes, but it's the only best thing to do. So I don't think that's a gender point. It's more about breadth and diversity, and I don't think COVID has made that more extreme than anything else, in my experience.
Shirley, thank you so much for that. And if I may, I'll share a couple of those thoughts with the panel tomorrow, if you're happy for me to do that. It's a very interesting discussion. And I've been having that with various people over the last month or so, both at the University of Greenwich, where I'm a teaching fellow, and today and tomorrow. I'm conscious of time, so I think that's it on the question, Shirley. I just thank you so much for such a brilliant talk. So we've had two great talks this morning from Martin and now from Shirley. Thank you everyone for your questions and your reflections. And Sarah, I'll see you at the chill evening with Nikki on the 10th of December for those cocktails. So look forward to the invite. Shirley, many thanks. Just got a bit of housekeeping now. So we've now got a break until we come back to our breakouts. So you go to the breakouts at 12:45. So we've got a break now. Please visit the exhibition booths. Please visit our sponsors. Please network. Grab yourself some lunch, a cuppa, network, as I say, virtually. Go to the breakout sessions at 12:45 and then join us back on the main stage at 2 o'clock, where we'll hear from Mark Britnell and Prerna Issar. Thank you very much, and thank you, Shirley.
Have a great day. Thanks very much for having me. Cheers.
Thank you.